The first stage is memorizing the text. That was something all the books had to do on their own. Second stage is being read, one-on-one, and now the third stage we're in, and I just finished that one too, is rewriting the book from memory. So that's the 3 stages of the project so far, because it never seems to end. A little bit about myself. My name is Johan Sonnenschein, and as you can see everywhere, in daily life I'm a lecteur de néerlandais at the University of Liège in French-speaking Belgium. And lecteur means a lecturer, but it's a good title. I like it because it also means in French reader. So I consider myself more and more as a professional reader. So this sign, I will put this one off too. I'm not a speaker, I'm merely a reader. As a scholar, I've always been interested in literature, poetry mainly, and I specialized in Dutch poetry of the Low Countries, contemporary, but also the broader scale of modern, what we call modern poetry from the last 1.5 century. And one special fascination is the work of the Dutch poet Herman Gorter, which will be mentioned more often this session. So when I joined the project of Mette's in 2012, I just had finished my PhD on the work of 3 Dutch authors, poets, among which Herman Gorter. So for me it was a new way of relating to his work. I don't know if anyone here has finished a PhD, but after that you actually want to do something completely else. This project was for me the possibility of still being of working with literature, but on a completely different way than the academic way of doing research. So in a way, I think it has saved my interest and fascination for literature, for the work of Herman Gorter, by revitalizing it and learning myself a new relation to the work. I started out as another work by Herman Gorter, not this one that's here on the table today, but one of his later works called Pan. It's a massive communist epic he wrote in 1916. It's a work of, I think, 12,000 lines. And I started it the first time I was in the project in 2012 in Amsterdam on the Something Raw festival. But 1 year later, when the project was programmed at the Kunstenfestival des Arts in Brussels, I changed. I changed my book into the poem Een dag in het jaar, a day in the year, also by Herman Gorter. The reason for that was that at the time I was collaborating on an experimental film project with a couple of friends in Amsterdam, which got the title Een dag in het jaar. That ended up in this film, and we were still busy filming it, and we just adapted the title of Gorter's, tried to loosely base the scenario on the poem, but that didn't work out. The title survived, so I thought maybe it would be a nice way of and to have more and more angles to the text, making a film out of it. Let's memorize it as well, I thought. So that made me switch to Een dag in het jaar. And at the same time, I thought, all right, we have this film, I'm now memorizing it, let's make an edition of the text as well, because as a scholar, I write on literature, and the best way of introducing a text to the public is making a new edition of the text. And it's not unusual to make an introduction to it, or to explain a bit about the context and the time of the poem, the life of the writer, and make an interpretation that goes along with the poem itself. Well, that was the first edition of Een dag in het jaar that I've made. Was that one I started working on in 2013 and was published in 2014 as this little booklet called A Glorious Thing, Een dag in het jaar van Herman Gorter. I will first tell a bit more about the poem itself, and then slowly get back to the project of Mette's and the edition I made in that context. It's a poem written in 1889, but was never published by the author itself, by the poet. He didn't like it enough to publish it himself, so it had never appeared during his life, only after his death. It was found in his legacy. It's a poem of 800 lines, so it's not that massive as Pan was, so you can learn it by heart completely. And it describes one day in the life of a young man who enters a city at the beginning of the poem and never gets out of it again, actually dies at the end of the day. And during that day, not only time passes, it gets afternoon and evening and night falls in, but also a year passes by. So it starts out in the morning as springtime. Around noon it gets hot and summer, and with the daylight fading, we're in fall and end up in the night and winter. And so this similar passing of the time of the day and the year is also symbol of the beginning of life, and then the ending of life in the night, in the darkness and death of not only our main character, but also civilization as such. So it weaves two concepts of time. So yeah, the title speaks for itself. One day in a year. So that's the concept of the poem. Formally, that's something I've been thinking and working on, maybe more than what the meaning of the text is. Formally, it's a text. It's rather modern. It still speaks to us, I think, today, but it's also a 19th century poem. So my view on it is that during the poem, the traditional 19th century poetic forms are being fall apart in a way. So it starts out as a metrical, very rhythmic, stable forms. Something, it rhymes. It has a certain pattern, and there's almost a meter. So it looks like a hexameter or Alexandrine. The fixed form poetry long had, but as in art forms all around the world, and poetry. And two, at the end of the 19th century, the forms we know, the fixed forms, break down. You get expressionism, for example, impressionism, expressionism. In a broader sense, we talk of modernism. That means an end of traditional forms and the making of new forms, which are not already there. So you have to create them yourself, and that's what happens within this poem of Gorters, in my view. And in that way, it shows what Stéphane Mallarmé called in his essay "Crise de vers." It shows the crisis of verse, and in a broader sense, the crisis of form. So the fixed forms that we inherit from tradition no longer fulfill their purposes. You have to break them down and create new ones. And that's what makes this text, for me, super interesting, because within Dutch, the context of Dutch poetry, this text actually is the first modern poem in which the author gets rid of the traditional forms and has to find out new ones. And in literary terms, we call that the free verse. Not the fixed forms of the traditional verse, but the free verse, which is not completely free, because you always have to look for a form when writing or when creating. Still, it has a rather traditional touch to it, and maybe that's why Gorter didn't publish it in his days. He thought it was still too traditional, and halfway through the poem he discovered the new form he later on, shortly after finishing A Dag in het Jaar, took as his new standard, and then he wrote smaller verses, poems, which became very well known in the Netherlands as the first modern poetry in that small language. So that's something about the text, the form, and the content of the poem. I now get back to my different relations to it within the project. Time Has Fallen Asleep, and I follow the three phases of stages I mentioned earlier. And well, here are the 5 different versions of the text. So I will point out which version I'm talking about at every time. First phase of the project was choosing a book and learning it by heart. I used the text of Gorter's collected poetry, that was this one, and tried to learn that version by heart. That took a while, but was not that difficult. I had big help in the traditional form it still had, namely the rhymes. Gorter breaks down the patterns and the meters, but he sticks to the rhymes. And learning by heart, I can tell you, is much easier if the text you're learning is memorizing is written on rhyme schemes. For example, there are 2 other books who are poetry. T.S. Eliot and Hans Favery, who was here, and they're from a later date in the 20th century, and they left rhymes behind, and that's more difficult. It's more like memorizing prose than. So I seemed very lucky with this traditional, still traditional poetry of Gorter's. The readings for the second phase of stage of the project is being read by one reader at a time. It was a different story. the crisis moment of me memorizing this text was the tryout for the first readings in 2013, I guess. Because one of the books read me. That's what we books do. We read each other just to practice and to say aloud. The reading sessions are always around 30 minutes. I was read by a book, and he said, "Well, I only hear the rhymes. I don't get the meaning of the sentences. I hear it's poetry, but I don't get it." So that for me was first it was a crisis, but then I learned a lot from it, because the helpful repetition of the rhymes that gets you through the text while learning it is an obstacle when you have to say it out loud as naturally as possible, because Mette didn't give many directions or how to do it, but the only thing she really stressed was not to act, not to be too rhetorical, so be as natural as possible. And that was quite impossible for me to sound naturally. I had to suppress the rhymes, and that had been the key for me when learning it. So I had to find a new way of rethinking the text, not as poetry, but as prose. So not the sentence, not the lines that end on the rhyme words, but try to get hold of the sentence as a whole, that most of the time is longer than the line. There are very long sentences most of the time. So my readers didn't have to know that it was poetry they were reading. That was what I learned from doing it aloud. I had to become an oral book and not the fixed form on the page I had so visually in my head. Well, it turned out, it worked out. I now memorize sentences more than the rhyme scheme, so it receded.
Can I ask you how you did that? How did you learn? When you had to relearn it in a way, to get away from the rhyme?
I made a new document of the. I learned this version. This is my original in a way. So this is the rhyme scheme with the words on the right, and I typed it myself, not as poetry, but as a story, as prose, and I tried to. And I carried that with me for the rest of the time. My way of memorizing is very visual. So I see the page before me, and I get from point to point.
Okay, so you see the page, not the image of the story.
No, that's something I learned of my relation to text, to literature. When I think of the poem, I see the page and not what happens. that's but maybe that's because of this this project made me think of ways to get it in my head, and my first. The thing I thought of first was, okay, get that page in my head, and then you have ways of getting through it. So yeah, I think if you ask the other books, there are 2 here, 3. Everybody has his own way of memorizing, but yeah, it could be that I end up with poetry all the time when as a reader, because I like to see a page that that has more dynamics to it than the rectangles of prose books. The last stage of the project so far has been rewriting from memory. So making a book out of your head, again, of the text that's in that you have memorized, put it back on paper. Mette first thought of a way of documenting this project, and turned out that we all, or a selection of the books that started back in 2011, all are now busy trying to make an edition of the books there were. But the question then arises: what's the form you give it? What's the form on a page you give it now that it has been transformed by memory and by embodying the text? And I think also more than for prose, it's still is quite clear that how a page will look like. But for me, with the poem that went already through a deformation into prose in my head, I came out to be true to the book I was for the readers. So the original I had learned by heart. Wasn't the original to base my new edition on. So I had to think, what did the text look like when I was reading it aloud to my readers, and that form I will use for my new edition. Well, I already told you, instead of the poetry line, the sentence, the prose sentence became the unit in which my readers heard the text. So I had to choose for a prose layout, but I still thought you have to have a hint of it once being poetry. So the thing I came up with was a layout that looks like poetry, but is set as prose. So it all has the same body text, as you call it, and the form has been based on the first paragraph of the poem. So this is the first stanza, but the end lines, the line ends not at the rhyme words, but when the typesetter said so. And in many pragmatic definition of poetry is the text form in which not the typesetter, but the artist, the poet himself, chooses the end of the lines. So now there's this one, and that became the second edition I had made of the poem, because a year earlier I made a more scholarly edition. I had dreamed of already as while doing my PhD, and that's in a way that's a copy of the original I memorized once. This looks like poetry as we know it, as free verse, and having these two different editions of A Dag in het Jaar, I now, one of the conclusions I have to make is that as an academic, as a scholarly reader, I'm much more attached to the original than as being part of the art project Time Has Fallen Asleep. So that's a strange contradiction that academics really cultivate the original. If you make an edition of the text, you go back to the text as it was meant to be, instead of the text when reading it. And the edition for Time Has Fallen Asleep is a much more freer edition, and that doesn't much more free, doesn't work with, doesn't go back to the original text, but produces it again and again. Last thing I want to tell you about the question of the original was, for this more scholarly edition, I had to look for the real original. So that wasn't this. This was already an edition, of course, from 1966, and I found out that there is a handwritten version in the Royal Library in The Hague. So I went there and asked for the copy of A Dag in het Jaar, a handwritten one. That's this one. But I also discovered that this isn't the handwriting of the author, the poet Herman Gorter, but by his wife. He not only didn't publish it, but also didn't keep a copy of his handwriting. We have handwriting of his on lots of other poems, so he did write himself. He didn't dictate, but this one was found in the legacy of a friend of his who kept a copy. So we owe him. Thanks to him, we still have the poem. It was found in the late 1940s. So the search of the original as an academic wasn't satisfied at all. This is already, the original is already a version, and well, since then I feel much more relieved to add two new versions to the poem. And when the film was done in 2015, there's one more. So. That's what. Yeah. I will give all these versions around the table. I don't know if you have if you all have a preference for which book to look at, but please feel free to look at all the different versions. And I thought.
You only read it in Dutch, or find it in Dutch in the artwork?
Yeah, there's no translation of it, and yeah, translation would be the.
That's a really interesting process.
Is there a relation between? So the original form, it's not that like in Bruno's book you have a poem per page. So yours, it's a much longer poem, so it's not divided over the page like how do you call this? Like 6 lines in a row.
Mm-hmm. Stanzas.
Stanzas, yes. So there is no relation between how you put it here on the page, how you copied it in the first place to make it prose to be memorized.
No, this one is, so this is so far the final edition is based on the body text is based on the first stanza, and then
nothing to do with the page.
No.
Yeah.
The rest of the book I to that form, and the funny of the thing I like, it's of course the measures of the body text are always quite random in prose, and I like the randomness of the body text in this the poem now has, but sometimes you still see that it once was poetry because the last words are still rhymes that light up for the eye of the new prose edition. Yeah, and so that's something for for the readers of this book to make up on whether they read it as poetry or prose. I don't know if it makes any difference, but
And from more the like academic scholars, do you have any? Has any of them seen this version, and what would be their reading of that, or do you have any experience yet of that? I mean, it's not so long ago that they were out.
no. Well, so far, this is quite a well-kept secret.
Yeah, so
This
far.
got some attention, but yeah, it's a completely different circle.
Yeah.
But if I show this to colleagues in the academic field, they're not really. They don't get it. They don't really get it. For them, the text has to be in the version the writer authorized. But if I show this book to poets, people write themselves. They think, "Oh, this is much more interesting than this academic work of yours."
Yeah.
Because this is something new, something playful and artful, and this is just reproduction, exactly, conservative.
But I thought it was like in the beginning when you were not busy with this yet, but just learning the books. You also spoke once of when you had this discovery of how to deal with the rhyme and to speak it more fluently and let the rhyme kind of come through the text, but not by indicating it.
Mm-hmm.
That also he himself used to say that about his work, that they are to be spoken orally,
Yeah.
so that it kind of also connects a bit with how the writer himself was, or that's an interpretation maybe of that.
Well, the strange thing is that about the rhymes, traditionally you end a sentence at the end of the line. So in the start of the poem, you still have that the end of the line is also the end of the syntactic construction. So the end of the line is a pause, and and then you get to the next line, and it's a unity in itself again. But Gorter was still using rhyme, but was also already modernizing poetry by just writing on over the lines. So that was quite a innovation at the time he did, and when he read his poetry aloud, he just read it as if it was prose. So that was more oral. Way of almost a way of writing orally for the ear, and I think most great poets they listen to the language while writing, and so that it's already a performance. Writing is something you hear, putting that on paper, and the rhymes for him, I think, were more a way of keep going. To one line from the one rhyme to the other is a jump that keeps you going while writing especially longer poems. So it made me think of the function of the rhymes in his work, and more generally something that he couldn't do without, but it completely lost its function for the reader, except when you memorize his text.
How did you find that sort of changed your relationship with it? Because I imagine even if you absolutely adore a text, having to go through that really laborious process of learning it all will probably strain it. a little bit?
Well, the strangest thing is that learning by heart, for me, poetry is all about sounds and structure of the sentence, and not at all about meaning. And so it didn't really learn me much about the poem in a way of interpretation, but learned me so much about poetry as a structure of sounds, repetitions, breathing, rhythm, and that's really incredible experience to know the poem that well, that you know the tempo, you know the rhythms, you know the changes, and when it changed my view on poetry completely in the sense that I now try to find, when I have to write on poetry, I try to find a language for that aspect of the text, the rhythm, the tempo, the sounds, and that's very difficult to write about, and it's very easy to interpret it. To interpret it and write about your what you think the text says or means, and that's in the case of poetry, that's only half the story, or maybe not even half of it. I brought something with me, a collection of poetry. I'm writing a review of right now. It's by a Dutch poet, Arjen Duink. It's very strange poetry. It consists of only loose words. So it's 2 times 7 lines, consisting of only 4 words per line, and they're only verbs. Nouns. So trouser, triangle, triangle, trouser. Square, plus, minus, square. Flour, way, salt, way. And so on and so on. So meaning is to write about this kind of poetry is impossible if you try to make a story out of it or to comprehend it. So I'm now memorizing this poetry as a way of getting access. Let it in to feel what it is, more than just looking at it and looking for meaning. And the essay I've now written in the first version, I write about the process of memorizing as a way of getting along with this language, with these structures, and that's helping me enormously, because then I write about reading, about the act of reading, instead of the meaning of the words.
I was going to say, it feels that very kind of traditional, like stuffy, maybe it's quite an English thing, but you think of like schools in the 50s and everyone would have to learn everything by rote, and then everyone kind of shifted the opinion that you had to really dig deep down into those things, and then it was about, like you said, like the meaning and that sort of thing. So I don't know, if you're kind of lecturing and stuff, do you see merit in teaching both approaches, or do you think one's better than the other? Or?
Well, I'm now thinking out of a way of integrating the experience of the project, memorizing in teaching on poetry, but that's a kind of taboo still is. So.
Yeah, it was introduced. Sorry, that's a good point. Because recently, a Conservative education minister in the UK floated the idea of learning poems by rote, as we say. And this was seen as unpopular because it was referring back to an early time when school was about merely repeating things
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
not essentially comprehending them.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, there seems to be a sort of changing school of thought about this. A couple of things I wanted to kind of like ask as well, mainly about retrieval, because obviously in the internet era there's this immense anxiety about retrieval and memory, and obviously with the rise of dementia and things has made people of my generation anyway particularly worried about kind of like this, our potential to retrieve things any longer, and scatterbrainedness, and always being able to find stuff on the phone so you don't have to retrieve. So that's one thing I wondered whether you had something to say about. But also I wanted to ask about the role of perhaps motion in retrieval. And, you know, in madrasas and things, they learn the Quran by often moving. And obviously, certainly in the Romantic poetry tradition of the UK, there's a strong linkage between walking and learning poetry and writing poetry. And so the motion, the retrieval, the anxiety about the retrieval in the dementia and internet age.
Yeah, well, the idea for the project came from the science fiction novel Fahrenheit 451. Sorry, I'm not good with numbers. And yeah, people memorize because they're forbidden, and in a way that's we don't live in a society in which that forbids reading, but exactly that point of the fact that you don't have to know or incorporate knowledge or texts because they're also always available on some database or internet. You already carry them with you within your phone or your computer. That makes it a protest also against time.
I mean, I think there's also something we make then a big separation. I mean, we're putting like as if information, like you know, you don't read necessarily or learning even say this poem. It's not about putting this information in your mind, but there's also the process of it, the what you call the reading of it. And I thought what you said in the beginning reminded me about the first conversation we had when I asked you to join the project. You also said this, that you know, speaking about the backgrounds and so on, I think of myself as a reader, and I think this in relation to, you know, once you learn the books or the poems by heart, there's also, we speak of it as making a very close reading of something. And so in that, you know, including that, so what is the poem or what is the book? It's of course much more than just, you know, retrieving the information or the kind of, you know, content of that, and you put it into your mind or not, because you can just go and search it somewhere. But in that process, the whole, you know, embodiment or even the first reading of something doesn't have to even be to learn by heart. We're kind of missing a link between the two. And I think this, what you say about learning by rote, there's also the English poet Ted Hughes, who has written a book called By Heart. I will mention it also tomorrow, but where he really speaks about this, the learning. I mean, we don't have the same terms for that, but the learning by rote and the learning by heart, where he also says the learning by rote, which is the one that everyone gets a bit stiff about because there's a kind of a bad connotation, but which is also very much a closing process. It's not really one that, you know, opens the creativity or the imagination of what that possible, you know, memorizing process can be about, which is also an experience of a close reading or of a learning, acquiring a certain kind of knowledge. And then I think, I mean, if I think about schools, like when you say an example like that, of course, in a conservative way, you would maybe say by rote. But if we could, open that to include, maybe the poetic way of saying learning by heart, meaning that that's a process that opens much more than just putting the content, but it's actually what kind of imagination is being engaged. When you say it's not about, the poetry is not about only the content of what's on the page, or like this one reader in there, something else must be there. If it's only about understanding that, I mean, there is, and what is this? What do we then use to access the reading in that way?
Yeah, and I think the problem could be with the old way of memorizing, is saying the poem out loud in front of the classroom. I think that's the most traumatic experience of most of the pupils who have done that. That's awful, and especially that breaks down the intimacy of the memorizing process with the text, and for that the readings are always one-on-one. And the reader decides how to read me, where. Or even in motion. I propose, let's go for a walk. I will say the text and you read me while in the park. That's possible. Or in a silent corner in the library. We are always in libraries. I didn't tell that so far. But there's one exception I saw. We still have 5 minutes. I once did that way of saying reading what I've been learning by heart for a group of people. I only did it once, where it felt like kind of a betrayal of the project, because it always was one-on-one. But this was within the context of not an academic, but in a literary scene in Amsterdam, where people talk about poetry all the time. And there was an evening on radical reading, it was called, and there were different academic readers who told about their strategy and ways of reading poetry and other difficult texts. And I couldn't think of what to say that evening, so I just said the poem by Gorter in front of a crowd of maybe 100 people. After all the talks with references to theory and analysis of text and always, and it was really something. It did something to the audience. Wow, this is still possible. We hadn't thought of that way of relating to text. Just memorize it. Yeah, and that worked out very well. So that's.
Did you start, because you mentioned that you're now memorizing in order to write about it? You're memorizing this book that you had.
Mm-hmm.
Did you start this after engaging in the process, in the projects? So you started memorizing.
Yeah.
As a technique.
Yeah. I did it a long time ago, maybe with a couple of Dutch classics. But while studying in my college years, I forgot about it. It felt a bit stupid, and now it's totally back in my way of my relation to literature. And if I have to write on something, and it's not 800 pages lines, then I memorize it first. It's by making sure that I don't skip the orality, not the essence of the text, but to get closer to what it's made of.
You mentioned a couple of other poets earlier, and I heard you say T.S. Eliot, and there was another one that you said that someone else had done.
Hans Favre.
Okay.
Yeah, he's here, so you can read him in English as well. He's his own translation.
So which poems were those? And I've got loads of questions for you. What were those poems called?
It's a whole collection.
Yeah.
It's many poems. Yeah.
And
then they learned the whole collection.
he's busy.
He learned No, it's actually the collection is the entire oeuvre of this author, so which is originally written in Dutch, and then there's parts of this which has been translated into English, and he's learning the translation of some of these poems,
And
of the ones that are
one?
It's 4 quartets.
4 quarters.
He's almost done, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's in the 4th right now.
One question related to this embodiment of the text and a bit also relates to how you memorized before. What is the difference, or what can you tell about this experience of embodying the text? No, she mentioned embodiment and you mentioned that he answered that he memorized before was different from the way that he memorizes now. And I think that maybe the main difference, because you're embodying embodiment of the text.
Yeah.
So how is the experience of that?
The experience of the
It's
text
difficult zone to give.
Of the memorizing with the embodiment of the text.
Because there's several different. I mean, one thing is the different. I mean, actually, the question has many sub-questions to it, because one thing is, of course, an important thing is that we are all different in what functions for each of us, and so also our experience of the same work will probably also be quite different. Then also, whatever it is that we find, many of these things also change over time. So certain things that you hold on to, or that use as keys early in the process, might change as you move on, because you're learning more, or because you're accessing something else in the process as well. So there's many layers, and also to discover the capacity of how many layers we can actually build on top of each other. In our embodiment of the text, let's say, it's almost like as if that text becomes also thick with other layers, which is my processes, but also my memories of reciting it to different readers or in different places, and also how this changes over time. And then, of course, specific differences, whether it's prose, poetry, your own language, or foreign language. Like there's many. So there's like something of how does it change my experience as a reader of the work, and also how this is as an experience of doing this as a practice, let's say. So it's like there's many. I don't know if that connects a bit to what you were thinking about. The questions.
It does, because and then it relates to, because I also was thinking if that embodiment, it's also more alive because it's being shared, or because if you just memorize and just say it, and then maybe still up here, but when that is the meeting, the encounter, and because of that, I don't know, that was, I didn't want to say because I want to hear.
No, but this is very important, and that's something of, like we can say the book becomes alive with the reader, and it's literally like this. I mean, even when we are practicing, we can do it by ourselves, but the moment that I say, okay, can I do my book for you, and in this moment I can only know whether I know it really or not.
Can I just ask one more little question? You said earlier that when you read to a larger group, it felt like a betrayal of the one-to-one thing. So could you maybe tell us about like what intimacy means in terms of you getting really just to one person, or one person reading you rather than a group of people? There seems to be something interesting in that.
I say the text, but I'm being read. So I focus on the real person who is trying to read me, because it's always a bit uncomfortable at the start.
I mean, because you're reading to one person, does that mean that it changes the way that you present the text because you're responding to this one person?
Well, there's always slight changes, and I do try to do it as neutral as possible. But the question whether to look at the person, to the way I sit, it's really different all the time because you have to find it out with the two of you,
Yeah.
and yeah.
It's kind of interesting. It's like passing on of the relationship between page to person to person to person.
And in the ideal case, that you disappear, you both disappear as body to become text, and this the reading process itself in that half an hour you have together that you forget about, and that's like I think that's what happened when reading text, also books. It's a possibility to disappear into a different world. The possibility of a world, as Blanchot calls
But
it.
also sometimes I have that I feel like I also become a reader. That I read the text together with my reader. Like I'm the text and I'm reading it. So I have a distance to it also.
Nice, yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
like
that's
you play
true.
the role of the text.
No, but it's different every time.
Okay.
But I really appreciate when that happens.
Yeah.
And that's why you prefer to read one-on-one rather than to a group, because
Yeah,
it
that
changes every time.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
I have one more question.
Thanks, I'll get that bell.
What is the difference between us telling or talk or saying it's a story that you know by heart to one person, and then the book, because you had that practice of the process of the learning, memorizing, that makes that different?
That's a very different proposal. It doesn't mean, I mean, also interesting, but...
But like telling a joke, for instance, or
Could be,
Yeah.
but maybe along
because
the
then
story.
you lose the relation to, you know, the media of that existing text.
yeah,
So the process, the kind of the process of that, and how that's then being embodied by, like that. There's a certain, I mean, there's a part that is not there then. I mean, then there may be another part that's there in the place of that, which is then the telling of the story.
being read, we're quite relatively anonymous. As books, it's not about us. And if you tell something to someone, you know, it's you're there.
It's another kind of performativity, I guess.
Different people have now
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
made this.
That's interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
listening.
Would you mind if I kept that?
Well, that's for you.
Thank you.
And
Yeah, this just makes me think about the relation between presence and absence and the performative aspect. It's interesting because you are body present, but
Yeah.
then it's the absence.
Or they coexist.
Yeah, they coexist, yeah.
is there a break? Or?